As the Iran war enters its 10th day, the U.S. military continues to make progress, degrading Iran's military and its infrastructure and its political leadership. But costs are also rising for as part of the war, with the seventh American casualty and rising oil prices causing anxiety in financial markets around the world. Meanwhile, Iran picks a new leader who turns out to be the son of the old leader. Will there be any change inside Iran from that appointment? And where does the war go from here?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
That's our subject for today on Potomac Watch. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. This is our daily podcast, and I'm here with Kate Batchelder Odell and Joe Sternberg, who have their eyes and ears on all things Iran and the markets. Let's start by listening to the president talk on the weekend about the progress he sees in the war.
We've accomplished more in 1 week than anyone thought possible. We've wiped out their Navy, 44 ships. We've wiped out their Air Force, every plane. We've wiped out most of their missiles. You see, the missiles aren't coming much anymore. We've also hit their manufacturing areas where they make the missiles very hard. Their drone capacity is way down. And we've hurt them where it hurts, including about every form of leadership you can have, we've wiped out.
Well, Kate, what do you think of the president's assessment there?
Well, I think the public does want to know, how's the war going? And browsing it is hard to get a sense of that if you're a news consumer. And so, look, I think the major objectives here, which are to degrade their ability, not only just get rid of their missile program, but also their ability to produce missiles, take out the launchers, but also the elements they need to rebuild that apparatus. I think it has been quite effective. And so there's a lot of focus on the regime, which we can talk about. But I think the Trump administration has been clear that its main objective is about its ability. It's about its behavior more than the regime, the tipping the regime being a bonus if it happens, but focused first on changing their behavior of terrorist proxies and ability to produce missiles and to use that as a shield for a nuclear weapon. And so on that front, I think the strikes are a success. I think, the president has an opening here now that there is some cost accumulating to continue explaining to the public why those objectives are worth achieving and sustaining until they're done, so that the public sees that there's some benefit to having undertaken these strikes.
Yeah, that's on the military front seems to be going very, very well. It continues. Some setbacks we want to talk about with Russian help, but just for the Iranians. But let's talk first about the Iranian succession. So the new Iranian leader picked over the weekend, Muqtada Khamenei, son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed on the first day of the war. He is from all the reporting of people who follow him, thought to be a hardliner, as they say, came up through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps ranks. And it's an unusual choice because the Iranians themselves have said that the Ayatollahs said they didn't want this to be a dynastic succession. Muqtada, his father, did not want it to be a dynastic succession, but here we are. And I guess in that sense, he may be something, Joe, of a compromise figure, the one person that everybody could agree on. But it doesn't signal that there's likely to be some kind of a change in the Iranian attitude. Suggests to me, and I guess most observers, that they think they can survive the regime and outlast the Americans. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple ways that you can look at this. One is, the phrase "any port in a storm" comes to mind. I mean, you do have the situation where the regime is very vulnerable militarily right now as a result of the strikes that are going on. And they are also vulnerable internally because, remember, one of the events in the lead up to this aerial campaign was the enormous domestic protests within Iran. And so you can envision a scenario where even though the late Ayatollah might not have wanted a dynastic succession, a view might have developed that that sort of hint of a dynasty of some sort might be what they can muster in terms of some kind of legitimacy for this regime that is deeply unpopular domestically already. You also have to account for the fact that a consequence of the aerial strikes so far has been that the pool of available leaders is shrinking, which I think has been one of the great successes of this campaign to date. So, I mean, as Kate was pointing out, the stated objective from the U.S. has been to change regime behavior and not necessarily the regime itself. And I think that is a wise framing, because although clearly there would be a preference for a different regime if Washington had its druthers, executing that is a very difficult thing to bring about. And there has been a bit of a weakness with this attempt to stir up an internal rebellion within Iran as a result of these aerial strikes. It hasn't been obvious to me exactly how something like that would work. So it may be that we are going to end up in a situation where you're going to have a certain amount of disorder or dysfunction on the part of the regime. And, if the goal is behavior changes in such a way that Iran is not going to threaten its neighbors or the U.S., that might be an acceptable halfway house for now.
All right, let's talk a little bit about go back to the military side of this for a bit. It's also obviously all of this is tied into politics as well. But Kate, there's reports that Russia has been helping Iran, particularly helping Iran in targeting certain American targets in the region. That is CIA sites, for example, and one in particular is concerning, that Iran may have hit a U.S. radar facility in Jordan that was responsible for operating region-wide defense, coordinating missile defenses in the region, and that would be a significant event if it in fact happened. Now, let's listen to Pete Hegseth on CBS 60 Minutes respond to a question about Russian help for Iran.
We're tracking everything. Our commanders are aware of everything. We have the best intelligence in the world. We're aware of who's talking to who, why they're talking to him, how accurate that information might be, how we factor that into our battle plans, our CENTCOM commander. So we know what's going on. And the president has an incredible knack at knowing how to mitigate those risks. And so the American people can rest assured their commander-in-chief is well aware of who's talking to who, and anything that shouldn't be happening, whether it's in public or back-channeled, is being confronted and confronted strongly.
The American people can therefore expect conversations with the Russians to stop this?
Well, President Trump, as people have seen, has a unique relationship with a lot of world leaders where he can get things done that other presidents, certainly Joe Biden, never could have. And through direct conversations or indirect, through him one-to-one or through his cabinet, messages definitely can be delivered.
Kate, I think that is called a dodge. He does not want to recognize, in fact, if there has been Russian and Iranian cooperation. He does not want to recognize if the Chinese have been helping the Iranians. And I suspect both are true. And we have decent reason to believe that they are true. And the fact is that the president himself was asked about this because there was a story last week in the press, first, I think, reported by the Washington Post, then confirmed by multiple media, that about this Russian help. And the president kind of said, well, we do this. We did this in Ukraine, too, to help Ukraine against Russia. Not a helpful answer. What do you think about both the extent of the Russian help and the administration's reluctance to acknowledge it?
Well, I think it should first be a real moment for recalibration in the president's thinking about Ukraine. If these reports are true, we have Russians shooting at American troops and helping shoot at American troops and trying to help the Iranians kill them. I mean, the Iranians don't have the satellite network that the Russians do. And so some of that intelligence could be very helpful to the Iranians in targeting American assets and troops. It's not, look, the reason to believe it is because there is extensive evidence that the Russians and the Iranians are cooperating on any number of other issues. I mean, Iran, it helped Russia in Ukraine, sent drone trainers to Crimea to help the Russians refine their tactics, their drone tactics on the battlefield there. The Russians have sent the Iranians training combat aircraft. They're probably not of much use now anymore. Has also, given Iran cash for drones. I mean, so the cooperation there is extensive that we know about. And so I think it's quite reasonable to believe that they are helping the Iranians target American assets. But the reason why I think the administration is reluctant to admit that is because it really underscores how what's going on in Iran is not just a regional isolated event, but is really a part of a much larger world bifurcation where China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are working together. And that would mean that what the outcome in Ukraine is very significant for the United States, and that what's going on in Iran is not separate. And I think that's why there's some reluctance there.
Yeah, but Kate, if that is in fact, and I agree with you completely that is what's going on, but if that is the reality, why not admit it to the public? Because because it somehow makes it harder for the president to avoid helping Ukraine. Is that the idea? He has a summit coming up with Xi Jinping here at the end of March, early April. So he just doesn't want to ruin that. But being honest about what is happening here seems to me to be important for the war effort.
It is important for the war effort. And I think there's still reason to think that Congress or others might put more on the public record here about what's going on. But look, I think Ukraine has been a pretty consistent blind spot of the president's now. He's interested in, he wants the conflict to stop from a humanitarian perspective. But his negotiators and his own views on it have been pretty consistent in the sense that he views himself more as a mediator coming in to stop awful killing among two parties versus, no, actually, this is the front line of defending America's interests in Eastern Europe and making decisions that flow from that perspective on the conflict. But again, I think this is a pretty strong moment for recalibration. I mean, this is a pretty direct confrontation to the U.S. president if they are going to help the Iranians target Americans and take out hard to replace missile defense batteries. As you know, these are not just minor tactical pieces of help. They are a much larger kind of strategic play that I think should be kind of a wake up call for us and hopefully the administration too.
All right. One other point I'd like to make, and this is the question of so-called boots on the ground, to invoke that cliche. The White House has been studiously refused to rule that out. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, has also refused to rule that out. And this, of course, has raised a lot of consternation in various circles, particularly when people who don't like this campaign against Iran thinking, see, it's going to be a forever war. It's going to mire Americans in Iran on the ground and so on. My own view is that it's wise not to rule anything out in this conflict. It may be that special operators need to go in, as many people have suggested, to keep track at some point, capture enriched uranium that Iran has somewhere. That'd be to the U.S. interest to have that happen. That's not going to be an invading force per se that does that, but it could be a U.S. and Israeli operation to do that. That would be in the national interest. There's some discussion about whether the U.S. Wants to occupy the oil facilities at Kart Island in Iran. The president is very fond of owning the oil, taking the oil, and that might be another mission for troops on the ground. But I don't think he should rule that out. All right, but let's turn to the financial markets and oil prices, which is the big story here in the beginning, early this week. The price of Brent crude, the global price of oil futures moved well above $115 for a while on Monday before falling back to $98. The last time I looked before we came into the studio, markets also fell around the world. Financial market stocks in Japan and Korea hit especially hard. They bounced back some. Joe, how are you reading the reaction in oil markets? This, of course, is all related to the fact that oil flow has seemed to have stopped through the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, and the uncertainty about when that might resume.
Well, I mean, look, you can understand why people are nervous because for decades, investors around the world have been conditioned by the fact that this kind of potential disruption in Middle Eastern oil supplies is a very bad thing for the global economy. And I think that particularly explains what we're seeing in some Asian markets where their dependence on energy imports from the Middle East might be higher than in some other places. And one other point I want to make right at the outset here is that if you look at equity markets, particularly in the U.S., my sense for the past couple months has been that investors have been looking for excuses to be nervous because you had this big run up in stock valuations. It was fueled by the AI boom. And then we've been going through this period for a while where any little research note that popped up on X that had something negative to say about AI could trigger a sell-off of some sort. So, from that perspective, if you thought that the markets were pretty richly valued to begin with and had been looking for reasons to be nervous, congratulations, you've just found the big one. But I think that some perspective would help here. I also had a look at some of the charts before we came on, and yes, if you look at the S&P 500 index, for example, year to date, it hasn't been a great couple days. If you look at the 1 year, you discover that actually President Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcement in April of 2025 was much worse for markets than what we're experiencing right now. I think that we also should not ignore what is really the huge global economy story of the past couple decades, which is that in that span, the world's largest economy, the U.S., has more or less weaned itself off of Middle Eastern oil and is now capable of meeting most of its energy needs domestically or from much more reliable sources. And so I think that from that perspective, you can understand why investors are nervous because partly their job is to be nervous about everything. But I think that we're not at a point right now, only 10 days into this conflict, with Iran clearly on the back foot already. And so not, where it's not obvious that this is going to become a very long conflict or that the Strait of Hormuz would be closed for an extended period. Some of the freak out in the media is feeling a little overdone.
Let's listen to Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, talk about global oil markets.
They shouldn't go much higher than they are here because the world is very well supplied with oil. There's no energy shortage at all in the Western Hemisphere. Right. The United States is a net exporter of oil, a large net exporter of natural gas, but refineries in Asia and Europe are seeing an interruption from the normal crude flows. But there is massive energy stores around the world. What you're seeing is emotional reactions and fear that this is a long-term war. This is not a long-term war. But it's a temporary movement.
Kate, this seems to be very much related to the market run-up to fear, certainly. The big run-up Monday and then back down below 100 shows just how volatile investors can be. But Wright has a real point here about global oil supply, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, and U.S. Supplies in particular. Now, oil is a global market, so we're going to see domestically here in the U.S. some gas prices go up. This is gasoline at the pump. Average a month ago was $2.98 a gallon nationwide. It's now about $3.45 a gallon. And some people are saying it could reach $4 a gallon. That's painful for a lot of people, but it's not a recession level hit to consumer spending. And then you have to look at the prices now versus historical increases, and real versus nominal prices. So the nominal price is the current price. And let's assume take $100 for the current price, just as a benchmark. One of our colleagues, Holman Jenkins, asked a question of AI to do some comparisons, and came back with an interesting response, which is that $100 today would have been at a nominal price $147 during the 2008 financial crisis, and adjust at nominal prices, and that's what it was in 2008. But adjusted for current dollars, that would be $217 a barrel. So, and when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the dollar nominal price there of $130 a barrel would be in real terms now compared to the $100 today, $143 a barrel. So, we're still not at a place where we have been more than once before, where we have ducked recession.
Right. I mean, I think Brent crude was above $90 for most of 2022 during the beginning of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, a couple broader points on this. I mean, one of which is I think the possibility of this, and the fact that we have a hostile power in Iran that could hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, not just with missiles, but by mining the water and whatnot, is really an argument that the status quo before the campaign was not stable, and that there were more risks than the public might have appreciated. And so I think it's the fact that Iran is now trying to leverage this. I think just it underscores that there was a real threat there to both the American economy and its interests. And so the president now finds himself in the position of having to explain to the public why their gas prices are going up, which is could be a domestic liability. But again, I got at this a little bit earlier. My own view of kind of foreign policy, public opinion, I don't put a lot of stock in any of the individual polls that we're seeing, because I think most of the empirical evidence is that the public is willing to be led, and they're willing to hear a case for why we're engaging in this campaign. And I think the public understands that the Iranians are a longtime hostile enemy, killed so many Americans over more than 40 years. And so, I think the real risk is that the president, who is sensitive to market pressure, sensitive to domestic political opinion, packs up too soon before he's really accomplished his objectives.
Yeah, I think that is one of the risks. The argument here, I think, Joe, is, from my point of view, is if you're going to, once you start a war like this or begin bombing, you can argue that Iran has started the war against us in 1979, but in this recent conflict, that once you start it, you have to fight until you achieve your objectives. There's a lot of discussion about what's the end game, where's the exit on this. Well, I think the exit is likely to be determined by President Trump. He says he's going to, work with Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, on this. No doubt they'll talk. But ultimately, it will be a decision the president makes to stop the bombing campaign. And I don't see how he can stop the bombing campaign until he does a lot more damage to the to the Navy in Iran, to the missiles, launchers, production facilities, take out all of the nuclear facilities, and then do a lot more damage, extensive damage, to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the besieged paramilitaries, and the sources of domestic repression that are in Iran, so that if the regime survives, and it may be that this regime will not fall anytime soon, in which case the president could stop the bombing without having achieved that. On the other hand, it would still be a substantial success, in my view, if he really, really degrades Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors, threaten the United States, and will take years and years to recover. What do you think?
Yeah, look, Kate raised the critical point here, which is that the status quo ante, having a millenarian Islamist regime, playing this role in the region with that kind of access to an important shipping channel for the global economy, and also let's not forget the ability to spread instability across the region and beyond through its use of proxies, including various terrorist organizations across the Middle East. That status quo was destabilizing. It was not healthy. I think that, if anything, what we're seeing on the economic perspective is that markets might have underpriced some of the risks associated with allowing that status quo. So I think that you're absolutely right, Paul. If we are now going to go in and make the kind of investment that we have made and take the kind of risks that we are taking in prosecuting this kind of aerial assault and potentially putting boots on the ground there, it's important we actually change that status quo ante in a substantive way.
And Kate, if it's short of regime change, that can still be a success, or do you think it has to be regime change now?
I don't think it has to be regime change now. Look, I think if it depends if they are really able to set back like I said, the ballistic missile program and the ability to use that as kind of a umbrella for their nuclear ambitions. If it can be set back in a substantive way that's more than 6 months, a year, I think that would be an acceptable outcome. And it might even, given the risk of what could follow the regime, perhaps it's worth settling for. But I don't think, I should say, I don't think we're there yet. I think Iran still retains enough missile capacity to really make this campaign worth continuing. And it certainly may need to last several more weeks to get to that point. That said, though, I mean, I don't discount I do think American strategy has to consider freedom as a cause that's important in our thinking about the world. And so if the Iranian regime fell and something else replaced it, that it would be in much in our interest to get a regime there that is friendlier to the United States than the clerics are. So
no doubt that would be could be potentially a great achievement and would be in our interest. The problem is, what are the costs associated with that? And that's a calculation the president has to make. So we have to wait and see. But substantial success militarily so far already. All right, Kate. Odell, Joe Sternberg, thanks so much for joining us. That's it for today. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. Thanks for listening.